Hi, friends. So this lesson is Module 3. It's our first introduction to the idea of populations. In this playlist and in this module, we'll be starting to think about the question of whether or not population is a problem, or if overpopulation is something we should be concerned about. So we're going to review the demographic transition model, which you learned about in the last module on development. And we're going to learn a couple more vocabulary terms. We're going to take a look at some questions and some maps and some graphs. So let's get started. Okay, so this is familiar to you all because we looked at the demographic transition model in the last unit. So I'm going to use this as a starting point for us to kind of think about what it means to think about population and birth rates and death rates, and why that could possibly be concerning, or what are some of the ways that we can think about controlling population, and why we even should. So in the last module, we learned that countries that have not gone through, if I can get the circle to click, there we go. Countries that have not gone through industrialization will be in a high stationary model. And so what that means is that birth rate or fertility rate, as you can see up here, is high. Both of them are high. The population is stable, but you also have a low standard of living. So basically, they have a replacement rate. So if for the same number of people that die, even though the number is really, really high, you're also going to see a birth rate that's high in order to replace that population. So that's what we mean when we say that it's stationary. Okay, so then moving into the next phase, when industrialization starts to happen, you see that people are going to live longer. The death rate is going to drop, as you can see here. But the birth rate is still high. So that's actually going to create a population boom. With poor social systems like healthcare and education, that's part of the reason why the birth rate is high, but also you're going to have trouble um, producing enough resources, enough food for all of these people, enough healthcare. Obviously, education is not going to be available to everyone equitably because they are not managing the population. Okay, so then we think about our low stationary stage. And when we use the word stationary, what we're actually saying is that the birth rate is replacing those who are dying in our society. So we're seeing that there's a replacement factor there. And that's what we mean when we say stationary. So when we said that this era, or this place in our demographic transition model is stationary, it's still low in development. And then you have to go through a phase where it's expanding. Your population is expanding. And then finally, once you get to that post-industrial, then your population is stable and your death rate is also low. Okay, so when we think about this, I'm going to move myself out of the way so you can kind of see my little graphic. So if we have a reproducing couple, a couple that's able to have children, if they produce 2 children, okay, and then they die, the couple dies eventually, what they've essentially done is replaced themselves. So that is what we mean when we say we have a stationary population. Okay? Okay, so now we're wondering, and this is kind of our driving question for this module, should we be concerned about population growth? So last week we were looking for answers to the question, can the problem of global poverty be solved? And we learned that in places where there's poverty, there's also a high death rate and a high fertility rate. We learned that in places that are post-industrial, populations will stabilize as death rates drop and fertility rates drop. That being said, we're seeing, and you can see this here, a rapid growth in population over the last century. And I know I'm going to hide this because it's very hard for you guys to see the dates that are down here. But this is on the graph, this is around the 1950s. And you can see starting from the 1950s and going up until a prediction for 2100, right now we're right about here, you can see that the population is increasing and that it is expected to kind of curve off eventually, but right now we see that it is increasing rapidly. Okay, so the question is, should we be concerned about this? So in this module, we're going to look at some of the ways that we can answer that question. Okay, so why is this even a problem? Why care? I'm going to move my picture again. When we think about the job of economists and the job of geographers and all the people who, if we're thinking politically, who make policy decisions for countries, they keep very close tabs on census data. Okay, they want to know demographic information, and we learned that demographics means information about a population. In order to make sure that resources are available to people, they so that they don't have to face a major health crisis that could cause massive death. Some of the things that we need to be aware of are, how can we provide enough clean water to sustain our population? How can we provide enough energy to sustain the needs of our population? Food production. And then, of course, how do we make sure that the environment isn't completely ravaged by a growing population? So, all of these ESPN issues, homelessness, disease, availability of water, energy, this graph here shows how much of the Earth's surface can actually even be used for our needs. As you can see, only 29% of the Earth's surface is land. Of that, only 71% is habitable for humans. Of that land, only 50% is what we refer to as arable land. And arable land means it's land that you can grow food on. Okay? So that's a vocabulary word that I would like you to continue to use when you talk about land that you can grow food on. Okay, whoops. I didn't want to do that. Okay. Of that 50% of that arable land, 77% is used for livestock. Only 23% is used for plant-based food. That said, the caloric needs of people are are such that we actually need 82% of our caloric intake from plants. So we only need 18% of our calories from meat or animal-based protein. And as many of you know, because I'm sure some of you are vegan or vegetarian, or you know people who are vegan or vegetarian, it is possible to get protein that you need to get that amount of protein. I'm going to move myself out of the way again. To get that amount of protein that you need from a plant-based source. Okay, so in the global protein supply, you can see that 37% of it comes from meat and dairy. So that leads us to ask some questions here. What does this bring up with regard to the way that we use our land and the potential problems associated with population growth? Okay, so I want you to be thinking about, what problems does this highlight? Okay, so in this map, some people like to look at this map and just get mad at the United States for having such a high caloric intake, 4,000 calories per household. Okay, so in this map, we can see that the places that consume the most calories are the same places that we've been seeing in all of the other maps. In the Northern Hemisphere, all of our core countries. Obviously, the exception is usually Australia, but we can also see some exceptions here in South Africa, and we can see Brazil. So this is where you see the highest caloric intake. These are also the places where the population is relatively stationary. So in what ways does population growth prevent or create a strain on the available food in periphery countries? And how does this map kind of reveal that for us? Okay, this chart shows us how much energy we consume over time and where we are getting the energy supply. I'm going to move my stuff again because I'm in the way as usual. We can see that since the middle of the 20th century, right about here, the demands for energy have skyrocketed. So, where are we getting this energy? You can see that most of it, and I've circled this area for you, most of this comes from fossil fuels, which cannot be replenished once they are gone. So, they're non renewable resources. So, in what ways might the growth of population contribute to another potential problem here regarding energy consumption? Okay, the next set of questions are going to be for you just to check your understanding of some of the new vocabulary and concepts that we're going to want to be able to use in this next playlist. The next task is going to be to look at population pyramids and learn how to interpret them.